welcome to this Talanoa on one of the most pressing issues our Pacific Islands are facing, the climate crisis. Today I'm joined by Purotu and Vaitoa, and we're going to be having a chat about the importance of history and education in navigating the climate space.
Kia ora, my name is Purotu. I am from the Cook Islands, Maniki and Rakanga, and from Fiji, from around like Nandi. Yeah.
Come Bani Māori, my name is Vaitoa. I'm of Samoan, Banaban, Kiribati, Irish and African American heritage.
We're studying at University of Auckland. I'm doing my BA in Pacific Studies and English.
I'm doing my BA in Pacific Studies and Sociology.
Oh, I'm 21.
I'm 20.
You're 20? Okay. Very, are young and future educators?
Yes.
Hopefully.
I love that. How has your island's history and culture, I guess, shaped the way you view the world?
I think for myself, I think my diverse ethnic background has kind of shaped me to be like a very social and outgoing person. And
I think both the islands that I'm from, it's like two very different communities, because from a Cook Island side, very social people, and I'm not as social. So I've got like kind of two worlds, I guess. And so, yeah, I think it's maybe become more open-minded about things and more aware.
And I guess, has being from these places also made you like more aware of climate change? Do you feel like that's different to you knowing about what the climate crisis is now? Like, does your identity play any role in how you feel about the climate crisis?
100%, I reckon. Like, if I wasn't Pacific, I feel like my understanding of climate change would be would be super different. Like, I think because we know that obviously the Pacific is at such a vulnerable position right now with the climate crisis, and yeah, I feel like automatically, subconsciously, you already know that it exists.
Being from the Pacific, you obviously see things through I don't know the word, but you like see it as one whole.
Very holistic.
Yeah. Whereas if I wasn't Pacifica, I wouldn't know enough, and I wouldn't know the severity of climate change on the Pacific.
When was the first time you learnt about climate change?
I can like vaguely remember hearing about it in primary. Really, really vague, and it definitely wasn't about the Pacific. It was just climate change in general.
I think it wasn't until like high school where I knew like about like global warming, climate change in a more general sense. And I think with the help of PAC studies and I think talking with other students and other people, like I've gone to learn more about like climate change in the Pacific, especially.
I reckon also like social media played a big part of it, because I saw a lot of like your work, Philly's work, and it was just like, yeah, it's happening. It's a lot more severe now, but also things like the strikes and stuff like that.
The climate protests, Pacific climate protests.
You're both studying Pacific studies.
Yes.
And like a big part of that is Pacific history, right? Is there like a particular Pacific historical event or like something about Pacific history that drew you to this area of study?
I think for myself, like Pacific history, it was more Pacific history in general. Like you feel like you know about where you're from, but like you don't know the wider context and how things came to be.
I guess like not knowing enough before I came into Pacific Studies is a reason why I wanted to come down this way too. Like, I don't think there's a lot of talk about like climate change in Pacific Studies.
I think it's very like surface level stuff. Like we just know the issues, but there's like so many more processes behind the scenes that's like taking place that's contributing to the climate change.
I guess that's why it's intriguing, like knowing what happened before, like in the past, what our history is like, and then kind of seeing where it's gone now.
I guess based around history, because a lot of people would say like, oh, I study climate change, and it's very like, it's science. When I actually think studying Pacific Studies is studying climate change.
Yep.
Because studying our history shows us how we got to this present.
Yeah.
And you spoke, like Vaitoa, you spoke a little bit about like exploitation. Did you want to expand a little bit of what in like our history books can show us about like either land or people exploitation?
This is like, this in the Pacific, you know, there's a lot of like cases of like, you know, mining, copper mining in like PNG and the Solomon Islands and stuff like in those places. And for myself, like in Banaba, like phosphate mining was kind of like the resource that was exploited on our island, and that kind of caused our relocation and displacement. And although it wasn't climate change in terms of like sea levels, you know, it affected the land and it forced our relocation to a foreign island, an island in Fiji, in Rabi.
And for those that like have never heard about like Banaba or what that history was, could you touch on it a little bit?
Yeah, so around 1900, the British Phosphate Company, which was comprised of Great Britain, Australia and New Zealand, they discovered a lot of phosphate deposits of really, and obviously phosphate is used to like fertilize farmlands and to make sure the soil is good enough and has the right nutrients to grow the food, to feed the cattle, to feed the population of New Zealand and those other places. So from 1900 to 1970s, phosphate mining had taken place, and that kind of just destroyed the whole land, and it was like there was nothing left for Banabans to really live off. So in 1945, at the end of World War II, they were forcibly relocated to Rabi Island in Fiji as part of a deal with the British government and the Fijian government. So, and we've lived on, all the descendants of Banabans have lived on Rabi ever since. So that's kind of like the brief history of the Banaban story, really.
To think about the parallels between, I guess the reason why we're in a climate crisis is because of like exploiting our land and taking so much of our land, which is the same situation that put like Banaba people in Rabi. And like how you all say it's like connected. And I think it's like, it almost makes our Pacific family like one with such a complicated history, but also like complicated present. I
think it can apply for both of us here, like, you know, both Pacific Islanders and Aotearoa, we're part of the diaspora, and it poses the question of like, you know, cultural identity and what it means to come from a place when obviously the climate crisis is like posing a threat to that place's existence, really. So yeah, it's a tricky situation to navigate.
A lot of like island nations will have to migrate to other places, and then it's like how do you navigate these identities when you're in a space that isn't home, like what you said.
Do you have any feelings towards the term like climate-induced migration?
I think it's devastating. It's a devastating thought, really. What makes you Samoan, what makes you Cook Islander, what makes you Banaban is obviously that relationship to the land and the ways of being, the ways of living, and the practices that are specific to that land, to that Moana. To have that gone, like that's devastating, I reckon. Like,
yeah, being forced to have to move because your home is essentially like fading before your eyes. Like it's cruel, like it's sad. And
especially because it's out of your control. Like we can't control the weather. We can do things to, you know, have all these efforts, mitigation, whatever, adaptation we could do, all of that stuff. But you know, like it takes all of us to like really figure this out, because no one wants to be in that situation.
Is there any like people in history or in Pacific studies that you've studied, like teachers, activists, or mentors, elders, that has like inspired you to like think and be hopeful about the current reality?
I have a lecturer in Pat, Yvonne. She does a lot of work around like climate and stuff like that. So one of the papers that I took with her was a sustainability and development paper, and throughout that whole paper, she talking about climate change and things that we can do. Also talked about like the markets and stuff like that, and how climate change and that kind of go hand in hand as well. And I think a lot of the work that she does is it's interesting, but it's also thought-provoking.
I think for me, she's my sociology teacher, Brianna Naipi. She like really talks about the Pacific in relation to like the world, like world systems, and you know, like it's a lot of these nations, these big nations like New Zealand or Australia or the States, you know, they monopolize the Pacific, and they're, you know, it's these outside processes that are affecting, like, you know, that contribute to the climate change. It's like, you know, like the tourist industry, or, you know, the exploitation of resources. And it's all like, it's all capitalism. It's all like this, all the messed up stuff that's happening like behind the scenes, and even all the politics in terms of like, you know, security and, you know, nuclear testing and, or, you know, testing out weapons of war. Like, you know, that's all contributing to the destruction of the environment as well. So she unpacks a lot of that stuff.
I love that both of the people you mentioned are teachers, right? I like professors, teachers. What role do you feel like education and educators play in getting like young people invested in climate action or invested in climate justice?
Educators play such a big role in this because a lot of our youth do spend a lot of time at school, and like their teachers are the ones that they see a lot of times, and they're the ones that have that influence.
Yeah, I think we talked about it before, like it's, you know, try to get as much information out there, you know, like, but I think the key thing, because obviously education is not for everyone, you know, not everyone's going to be at uni and be like hearing about the stuff, and so I think the key thing would just be like sharing that information in a very simple, engaging way, and whether that's via social media, and, you know, even like, it doesn't hurt, you know, like to put as much out there, like, because you know, let people, as long as it's accessible, then that's all you can really hope for, and then let people decide for themselves whether they want to, like, you know, look more into it. But yeah, no, I think education is integral, really.
It's important in making sure that our like Pacific communities, especially our youth, know what's happening, because there's not enough talk about, you know, the climate crisis, and yeah,
that's true. And I think it's like, that's also why it's important to learn like pre-colonial history as well, like, because I think a lot of times when we frame like history, it's like history that was written, and a lot of the time like history that's written is the history that started when like colonization happened.
Pacific history is oral history.
And so I think you bring like such a great point of like Indigenous knowledge being so important in this like time frame in our generation, and for us to really like access that Indigenous knowledge, we have to like go back even further than history books. So there's part of our histories that we won't learn in Pacific Studies. There's parts of our histories that we'll learn talking to our grandparents. Of learning like very old songs, of going into the archives and like digging up things that like we've never seen or heard of before. So I think there's like a very, I don't know, a symbiotic thing happening in this conversation where like we're acknowledging the importance of history and education, but also knowing that like something also has to happen beyond what our minds know as history and education.
I think you bring up a good point, like looking to the back, looking to our past, obviously, to go to the future. I think that everyone, like, that's a common phrase everyone uses. So yeah, I think that's really important to dealing with the climate crisis.
Yeah, and consider the fact that our elders didn't have access to the books, I guess, like writing down what they know. The only things that the way that they've passed on stories is through storytelling or oral traditions and stuff like that. And so it is important to have those conversations with your families and hearing that from your elders and stuff like that, just to kind of get an idea of what they know.
What do you feel like the world can learn from Pacific resilience?
I think it's to like be optimistic, because I know a lot of people are so like it's sad and everything, but a lot of people have just given up on like this whole fight for our islands. But I think like hearing all these stories, like what you were sharing, is important, because it just shows that there are people fighting. Like a lot of the work you do, there are people fighting for the Pacific, and it's good to be optimistic and hopeful that, you know, the fight is going strong, and we shouldn't feel, what's the word, like,
Don't feel hopeless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, the future is bright. For our islands, there are people fighting the fights going strong, so yeah, be optimistic and yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree. Like, I got to commend you and the likes of feeling in that, or you have your platforms and you're using it to spread awareness, and I think resilience looks like that's resilience. But then resilience is this as well. Resilience is Talanoa, and is to talk about it, intervene, intervene in whatever space you're in, and whether that's in uni, that's in the classroom, that's with your mates.
Yeah.
That's you got to intervene in whatever way you can to educate people, and
It doesn't hurt to be hopeful.
Doesn't hurt to be.
No.
Doesn't hurt to be hopeful. Yeah.
No, and it's good because I know there are a lot of things that are happening now that people are trying to do to, I guess, preserve. Like, I think it's Tuvalu that is doing the digital, that whole space. Being optimistic about the future for our Pacific islands, it's important.
Yeah.
But then it's interesting because when we say the world, not to be that guy, what do you mean by the world, right? but is it a matter of, if you want to see change, will that change come from just the general population kind of just learning about the Pacific, or is it just a matter of these leaders to really get onto it, don't leave it last minute kind of, so
I think it can go kind of hand in hand.
it's 50-50. It's everyone needs to be on the same page, but then also world leaders, because obviously they're the ones who are making they have the power to make these huge decisions that obviously can really help us.
But I reckon if you look at the stories of resilience, seeing how people are still fighting for that and their voices are being heard, even if it's just to their own communities, things like that build up to something bigger. And so that's something that I'm looking forward to, and I can see it happening. I think everything comes down to just seeing how resilient so many people are about the fight for climate change and climate action.
Yeah. Such important points, right? It has to become bigger than just our small group, because it is their actions that are impacting our village.
Yeah.
I think only, in the last 20 years, our generation and younger generations are probably going to be more aware of it than probably old folks from before. So it's gonna take time, but small changes it's a ripple effect, really. That's all you can hope. All you can hope, really. So
yeah, I agree. And I love the thought that Talanoa is this is the resilience. It's the when you separate the word Talanoa, I guess in Samoan, because we use Talanoa in a lot of languages, but in Samoan tala means to open and noa means knot. So to Talanoa is to open knots together. And I love the idea that part of climate resilience is having these conversations so that we can learn from history and then move forward into the present. Well, thank you both so much for joining me here today.
Thank you.
And having this chat.
Thank you.